The iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad are so personal. They are warm in your hand. They sing to you when you're alone. They are caressed.
I discovered that there was a lot in common between James Brown and Steve Jobs. They were both fantastic performers. They were both great band leaders who had a tremendous sense of how important it was to surround them with really talented people. In the case of Jobs, people who did the actual inventing and coding and so forth and so on. But they were also very ruthless people, and they drove people very hard. They had a sense of where they wanted to go, even if they didn't know exactly how to get there. They drove people very hard and also were shameless about taking complete credit for what was done by a large group. But nevertheless, they both changed the face of their, James Brown changed music forever. Steve Jobs changed the face of the computer and our relationship with it forever. So I think there was a lot of similarities.
Also, you got, how did you get interested in this? Was it reading the Isaacson biography? Was that really kind of what connected you to this project?
It was staring at my iPhone.
Okay.
And when it didn't come up, no, I got interested. I mean, it's in the film. I got interested because of this enormous outpouring of grief after Jobs died. I was just very surprised by it. He was a very powerful and successful executive, but I can think of a lot of powerful and successful executives, and yet we probably won't weep for, say, Lloyd Blankfein when he goes. I was just curious as to why that was, and what was it about our relationship with Jobs and what he represented that that provoked so much grief. So that was really what got me into it. Along the way, it was out of that really that I was driven to read the Isaacson biography and a number of other biographies, including a wonderful, rather small one. I'm going to get the title wrong now, but all about Steve Jobs and Zen, which was also of interest to me. That I felt that was an area of his life and mindset that hadn't been properly explored. And I was kind of interested too in this idea of Steve Jobs as a counterculture figure. He goes to India, he drops acid, who then becomes the head of the most valuable corporation in world history. That was interesting to me.
What do you make of, well, first of all, I should ask Apple. You approached Apple to try to get their cooperation as well, didn't you, at the beginning?
Yes. My first two calls were to Laurene Jobs and to Apple. Both met with the same result. Non-cooperation, though. Apple, I should say, their note back to us was very interesting. Apple said they did not have the resources to deal with our request at this time.
The most valuable corporation.
So anybody here who has some extra change in their pockets might consider giving it to Apple so that they have the resources in the future to deal with filmmakers and or journalists.
What do you make of now Apple? They didn't cooperate with your movie, but they did cooperate with this new biography of Steve Jobs called Becoming Steve Jobs. What is the company doing? Do they have serious concerns about the founder's legacy, his long-term image?
Well, I think the biography Becoming Steve Jobs, they felt was probably more becoming of Steve Jobs. I think that Apple has always been actually notorious, and some of that is in the film, for being rather ruthless with its critics, but also for managing the press in pretty brutal ways. So I don't think that's changed. It's changed a little bit, I think, since this woman Katie Cotton left and since Tim Cook has taken over. It's a little bit softer, but still their determination to make sure that it's presented in the way that they want it to be presented is pretty intense.
And why did you decide to narrate it yourself?
The film was I've been narrating my films, and a lot of my editors not Mike, but a lot of my editors over time have been like, "Oh, really again?" But it's not because I have, it's not because I think I'm Morgan Freeman or anything like that. It's just because if I write the copy, it seems more honest in some ways to narrate it. And this film was kind of a meditation. It was a little bit different than some of the other films I've done, and so it seemed appropriate to wonder in the first person rather than to do it in a rather stentorian voice of God kind of way.
I thought one of the more telling points of the movie is when you interview one of his ex-girlfriends and she says he blew it. And I'm just wondering, what was your reaction when she defined his life?
My reaction is in the track. I mean, I think there are very few people in the world who would say Steve Jobs blew it, because we all recognize him to be so staggeringly successful. And yet I think, what she said is very poignant and also very true. A lot of what this film is about is values. And while Steve Jobs very much claimed the mantle of a counterculture figure, the fundamental values of the counterculture, the sort of communitarian principles, a respect for spirituality, a sense of the importance of the environment, the disparity between rich and poor, all of that, those weren't things that entered into Steve Jobs' mind very much, particularly toward the end. And so I think, she's talking about enlightenment and how he was trying to approach that, and whether or not he really got deep into a broader sense of how he fit in terms of the rest of the world. And I think instead, these principles that he started with or encountered, and even the kind of the Zen stuff the idea of Zen meditation along the way, he took the surface of it. I think he liked Zen meditation because it focused his mind so he could make better products. But I think the idea that it was taking him to a place of enlightenment was something that he left very far behind. So he took the trappings of the counterculture, but not the values thereof. And I found that very interesting. So I think, in a way, that's what Chris Ann is talking about when she says he blew it.
One more question, and then I want to open it up for questions from the audience, and that is, had Steve Jobs been alive and you were doing this project, what would be the first question you would ask him?
That's a good question. I guess it never occurred to me because I never thought I'd have the opportunity. But I guess I'd ask him why it was. Late in the film, he talks about, in the Gizmodo case, he talks about Apple's values, and he says that we weren't going to shy away from kicking down the door of a journalist because these were our values, as if there was some very important moral principle at stake here. And I guess I'd ask him, what are your values? That's what I would ask him.
In those 3 years together, I packed in a decade or two of experience. Steve packed in a couple of centuries. In his 56 years, he did everything he wanted, and all on his own terms. It was a life well and fully lived, even if it was a bit expensive for those of us who were close.
I agree with your decision to narrate, especially the piece at the end reflecting on how we should reflect on ourselves before we brighten up everything from the iPhone. Can you tell me anything about the vocal at the end?
What?
There was a female vocal over, I think it was over the credits.
Oh, over the credits? That's Cat Power, The Greatest. I mean, the song is called The Greatest. I like Cat Power very much, but it's the song that's called The Greatest.
I just wanted to add, oh, sorry. If
So-
you had interviewed his family, I know you had interviewed his first girlfriend or wife, but had you interviewed his family or Mr. Cook, who took over Apple at this point?
No.
No.
I tried. Like I said, the very first call I made was to Lorene Jobs, hoping that she would engage. And it seemed initially that she would. And then she decided not to. So we were never able to have the conversation that was briefly set up. And indeed, she reached out to a number of people and told them in no uncertain terms that they should not talk to me. So she, I think, would have been the only one I would have been interested in talking to. I did have a brief conversation. That's not quite true. I did have a brief conversation with Lisa, who declined to participate in the film. I would have been interested in talking to her. But you know, it was more about Steve Jobs as a businessman, though it is about his character. Anyway, I reached out to her first. Tim Cook, he was part of Apple, and Apple declined any cooperation. So there would have been a number of people I would have liked to have talked to at Apple. Tim Cook would have been one, and certainly Johnny Ive would have been another.
Thank you.
Here. Yeah, could you? Thank you. I'm just wondering how Apple has dealt with its competitors, specifically Samsung, and if Samsung was the first to develop the smartphone.
Well, there are a lot of court cases that reveal how Apple deals with its competitors, and Samsung and Apple were involved in a big court case. So I would urge you to look in that direction.
I think we have time for one more question. We have about 2 minutes.
Just a conspiracy theory here, but do you think his family is incentivized not to talk to you?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. Yeah, the question was, what did I think at the end? Did I think he was a sociopath, or did I think he was becoming more self-reflective toward the end of his life? I think it's clear that he was becoming more self-reflective toward the end of his life. I don't know. I never met him. But, you know, we know that he talked at great length to Walter Isaacson and gave Walter, talked to Isaacson without setting conditions. That is to say, Isaacson could write the book that he wanted to write. So he was clearly self-reflective. The question is, and that's part of what the film is about, is was he really going deep, or was it a way of building a legacy that was designed to be there after he was gone? I'm not sure that Steve was really willing to dig deep into what made him tick and how other people may have seen him. That's my view. But I certainly think he was very self-reflective toward the end.
Thanks to Apple, we're all connected.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for coming.